Okay, now time for part 2. First thing I noticed when stepping back and returning is the face looks a little weird. So, I'm going to fix that right now. Which, again, really important to have your face on a separate layer. I'm going to shrink this eye down a little bit. Maybe rotate it. Looks decent. Of course, we'd need to move the eyebrow a little. Yeah. I'm just gonna move this one too so it keeps the neutral facial expression. Should look a little better. Start flipping things around so you can see it from a different angle. Everything looks pretty decent at this point. So, it's time to start coloring. For coloring, I like throwing everything in a folder. And then from this point, I like to set the outlines to a reference layer. And then having our magic wand and our paint can on multiple reference, and set that to your reference layers. So now we're going to be filling in the skin. Also, if you turn off your face color, or your, if you turn off your face outlines, you can quickly fill in your base without too much hassle. Then you just turn that layer back on and everything's there. You don't really need to worry about any of these small areas. It's all covered for you. You paint that in, and just going along, filling in all of our skin tones. That's not going to be skin. One thing I forgot to mention when drawing the fingers is a lot of your hands rely on how you draw them based on your line starting point and end point. So a lot of trouble with hands. A lot of beginners might find they're drawing sausage fingers as such. And that's because of the start and end point. If you start from the end and curve around, you can get much more appealing fingers that way. It's really easy to go in and fix things after that. Same for like the thumb shape. You have your thumb and you end, and you come back for the finger shape. Just a little small thing you can try. Now that we have the skin tones finished, we can title this folder. I usually like to have 4 different layer folders here. I'll have skin, clothing, hair, and eyes. And I usually like to put them in that order. However, come back to the clothing. Now the hair might be a little confusing to color just because of the multi-tone stuff. So we're going to start with our base colors here. Increasing our G-pen size to 80. Oh, one thing I should mention is, for getting hair shaped like this, you'll have your normal little point, and then just come along and right at the end, hook it down, and go back. It's a really easy way to draw like this kind of ribbon hair, and Shiro Miwa does that a lot. Then another thing you can add is like keep it going and add a little point to the end. You can really do that with any kind of hair. You draw another strand coming out. It gives kind of a different style to it. Then again, you can pull it down, connect it again. It just adds variation to everything. Once again, turning the face off, making sure we don't destroy the base color there. That should be all the hair. And then what you can do is change your paper color. I recommend always coloring on a neutral, maybe not neutral gray, but like a very slightly tinted 50% gray. You never want to be working with pure blacks or pure whites. They'll change how your colors look. Okay, now that that's done, we'll need to go in and change the base color just a little bit. I'm grabbing from the reference. Going to select these edges. Because we really have kind of 2 or 3 different areas of hair. We have this main, I guess it's like a bob area, and then we have the right side and then the left side, and we want to be able to separate those consistently. This is one thing that kind of sucks about doing complicated designs, is the selection process. It's a little tedious making sure you have everything selected there. And then we're going to lock transparency. And then we're going to grab our gradient tool and just gradient up. Might be a little too far. And looking at the shape of the hair, we actually missed a spot there. And I would like this to be a little brighter and a little more saturated. It's not too bad. I'll pull up that way a little bit, pull up this way a little bit. And then you can always jump into your airbrush. I use the soft airbrush. All of these are just your default tools. And then we're going to have the darker color, the lighter color. So we can just shift between them and go in and clean up whatever we feel we need to. That looks good. Instead of deselecting this, because you already have everything selected, you can just Control-Shift-I. It inverts the selection, so now the only thing we have selected is going to be, well, everything that we didn't just color. Now we need to do the same thing that we did to the outside of the hair. And because we've locked transparency, we don't really need to worry about having everything else selected, because we're only going to be changing the color of the hair. So we'll pull that up, and we'll come here, we'll pull this up. Missed a section down here, we can just airbrush this back in, or even use the G pen. And then go in and airbrush anything that needs to be fixed. This stuff up. Lighten this down a little bit, or lighten it up. And that should be fine for the base color of the hair. Now that the hair is done, I'm going to go in and color the eyes. Oops, we don't need that clipping. We should probably turn the eyes back on. That's done, we're going to add the whites of the eyes. And this is one of the reasons you really need to make sure you have that general eye shape correct, since this step can look really strange if you drew an odd shape for the eye. But we're going to follow that almond shape. We just have our stuff in there. Grabbing our blur tool, we're just going to blur out the edges of this. And then like we did with the hair, we're going to lock transparency. And then pick a very low saturation mid-tone gray with a slight red hue. We're going to add in the shadows. We're just going to be shading in the top section there. Same thing with this eye. And now I'm actually going to color the eyes. I'm going to reselect that color there. We're going to pick something a little darker and slightly blue. All of your colors, when you're switching between your highlights, your base tone, and your shadows, make sure they're all slightly different colors. One thing that I like to try and do is always make your shadows slightly bluer and always have your highlights slightly yellow. That way it adds a bit of warmth to your picture, but still you have those colder colors for the shadows. So we're going to color in the eyes. We have our first layer adding in this little circle thing. Second layer, we're going to use the same color but with a multiply layer. Actually just draw in ellipses. Now that that's done, we can add a new layer once again. Select black and just go in and gradient it down. We don't want to go straight to pure black, so we're going to leave it a little light at the top, because you really never want to use pure black or pure white in your drawings. Now that that's finished, we can add another layer once again, go to glow dodge, and we're going to choose a very light yellow. Light yellow is going to be used for the bottom over here. I'm on color dodge, glow dodge. And you want these effects to be subtle. You don't want them to really hit you in the face, because at that point they're just a little too bright. And then we're going to add another layer once again, and this one is also on glow dodge. However, we're going to want purple for this and have it fairly saturated, and I have a brush for this just to make eyes go a little faster. Add in a bunch of circles. If you don't have a brush like that, alternately, you can draw the circles in themselves and then erase out. And then draw some more, erase out. And that's kind of the effect we're going for. So we're selecting the brush again, color it in, and then we just go in and erase. And that's it. We're going to drop the opacity down to about 50, and that's the eye. Now we can go above the line arts, set another glow dodge, make this one also a little bit yellow since we don't want to be working with pure white. And now this is where you have to decide which way you want the light to come from. I'm going to choose this way for our light source, only because we have whites on the eye over here and over here. It's just going to make highlighting this a little easier for me. You can really choose anything. It's up to you at this point. We're just going to draw in our highlights. In a previous video, and previously, like all my drawings, I used to try and keep the highlights inside of the iris, but now I'm opting to not, because it makes more sense. If a highlight hits your eye, it's going to do the entire eye. It's not just going to stay on your iris. So we want to reflect that. Now that that's done, we can drop the opacity a little so it actually shows through some of that color. Pick up your airbrush and just darken down some of this. I would recommend using a mask for this, because if you erase a lot of your highlights and come back and say like, oh, I want a little bit more, you can do that easily with a mask. That is something that I learned from graphics design. You never want to be erasing your products. since you're working on a drawing that took you, well, so far this is an hour and 45 minutes. We don't want to be erasing anything we've just drawn. Instead, we're going to mask it and then erase out of the mask. Because then if it comes to a later stage where we actually need that back, we don't need to be redrawing things. We can just quickly edit the mask and we're back to where we were. So masking out a section of the outline. And those are eyes. Very quick, very easy, and we're done. So now we're going to throw in the base colors for the clothing. I also recommend separating these into layers, but don't go overboard. So these are going to be the browns. And I'm going to make them slightly more red, a little lighter. Now everything that has that brown color we're going to fill in. It's also going to be parts of the gun. Although I think I might... Yeah, I'm gonna do the guns on separate layers. It'll be easier later. Just filling in all this brown color. I think that should be it. Oh, got the straps down here. And the wrist. There. And then the headdress. Ha! There, now that should be it. Just gonna double check, make sure we filled everything in correctly. Looks like we did, so now we can move on to the other colors of the clothing. This is going to be the yellows. Let's select that from there, make it a little brighter, a little more red. Start filling those in. Actually, we might want that a little more saturated, a little more yellow. Yellows can be a little tricky to work with, so I am going to be a little careful here. Okay, there we go. And this process is made a lot easier if you keep your line art clean. And if your paint tool is acting up, I'd recommend changing your color margin and your area scaling. And then the back. Oops. Okay, and that should be all the yellows finished. Now we're gonna go in and do the skirt color. The skirt is going to be a little interesting because of all the different tones in here. So I'm going to start with that yellow color. That's also the same as the shoulder thing. Just going to leave them on one layer. We'll color that in and then color in the skirt. That should be fine. I'll do all this frilly stuff after. Now, like we did with the eyes, we're going to lock transparency, and we're going to select this darker green color. And now that the dark green is selected, we can go into our gradient tool. And I'm actually going to separate the skirt out into 2 sections. That way we can have a little more control with this. Then jump into our airbrush. Make sure we have all these colors correct. I do prefer to do all these fancy colors in the base tone rather than apply them afterwards. You have a lot more control doing it this way. And we'll go in, make this more green. Now we can select the light color, come back in with that. Selecting this half of the skirt, back to gradients, and we can lighten that down a little bit. And once again, jumping into our airbrush. Airbrushing that down, and back to this side, and being very subtle at this point. And now, actually, gonna affect this. Select our green again to the bottom, because we want them to blend together pretty nicely, but we also still want to be able to tell the difference between all the different colors we used. I'm gonna take off because I forgot to do this section. Just gonna fill it in quickly. Select our darker color, airbrush that in. Select our lighter color, go on top and then blend them together. Oops. Gotta make sure we turn back on the lock transparency if we're gonna be airbrushing on any of this. Okay, now we can do the other frilly stuff down here. Actually, I'm gonna have that be separate. I'm gonna name this one Skirt Frills. Now, because this color is straight white, I'm actually gonna make it slightly green, just so we aren't working with white. With that taken care of, now we can go in and get some of these darker colors taken care of. Just gonna airbrush down. I should take care of that. Now all that's left are the actual frills. Maybe these have more technical terms, but I'm not familiar with female clothing. Well, I probably should be at this point. Drawn enough of it. I'm gonna include that as part of the clothing. You could leave that out and have it be part of the background, but I'm just gonna make it clothing. Simplify it a little. Make sure we get the headdress in. All that's left, other than the guns, are those silver pieces, which I'm going to title buckles. For all of my metallic colors, I like to use for golds, I'll use a slight red. For silvers, I'll always use a slight blue color. Makes them a little more appealing. Now that that's taken care of, we can start coloring the guns. Now we have the browns we can work with. I think it's really only going to be the handle over here. And again, like the clothing, keeping these in separate folders. That's not a word. Browns. Look at the golds. Gold can be a very tricky color to work with. Actually, that's going to be silver. I'm going to zoom into the reference so I make sure I get these colors correct. Okay. And we have our silvers. Again, making them slightly blue. Okay, and that's all of our base colors done. So now we can actually start shading everything, rendering out the shapes. First thing I'm going to do is the skin, and then I'll do the hair, then the clothing. Finally, the guns. bring some edge lights in here. And then when the shadows are done, we can add another layer underneath and just gradient out the main shape there, gradient out from the shadows, and then drop that to 50%. I do that quite frequently in a lot of my pictures. Just adds a little bit of diversity into the colors, or the shades of everything, and the lighting. Now we're going to do the hair. Now for the hair, normally I would just do everything on normal layers, but because we have multiple colors going in there, I'm actually going to use multiply layers. So for my multiply layers, I always do that same 50% value with a little bit of saturation in either blue or red, depending on the color of the shadows I'm working with. Now because we know our light source is coming from the top left, and that the general shape of the head is a sphere, we can quickly go and shadow out where the light would shine. And then quickly just go and fill everything in. Again, turning off the face, because we don't want that in the way when we're trying to fill anything. And we might as well just go and pick a larger brush and just paint all this in. I will be applying the layer after, so the color might seem a little strange at this point, but it'll all be fixed later. Fixing up our line here, making sure it looks a little more correct. Now that that's done, we can start pulling out our shadows. This is something I've started doing recently. It's just fill a large area with shadows that you know you want dark, and then pull your highlights out of it, rather than just going in and drawing all your shadows. It's a lot easier to work with, and it's just a lot simpler. Less thinking you have to do. And a lot of the time, it's not really the lines that are in the right place that make your drawing look good, it's the lines that are in the wrong place that make your drawing look bad. So we're trying to minimize the amount of mistakes that we're making. At least that's what we're trying to do. So at this point, all we're really doing is rendering out the 3D shape. It really doesn't matter what surface we're working with, as long as we know how to render out the material. So for the hair, it really doesn't matter what color we're working with or the shape of the hair, we're just rendering out that 3D shape. now that the main rendering is complete, we can go in and start cleaning up any of our areas, like this section here. Try and pull in with the small cracks and crevices. Make the shadows look a little more natural. This is also where I'm going to be adding in a lot of the detail. For sections like this, you can just pull a little strand out. And then for the... Actually, I'll cover that in a bit. I'm making sure we get all of these shadows in the right spots. Pull this up. Kind of extends the strand of hair here. Same with this one. Okay, once we have that taken care of, now we can go in and throw in some of the shadowing, like from the headdress. We have a shadow there. We're just going to follow the general... We're not really following the shape, but we're following what we think the shadow would look like. Because we know this section here is going to be coming forward, light coming down, so the shadow would be slightly forward. Same with this one, because at this point we're really just trying to think in 3D. So like this goes forward and then up. And so this being above would create another cast shadow here. We're really just trying to place the shadows in our head, try and get all of this set up correctly. Then the ribbon here would be causing a cast shadow down this way. And now we have the strands, which putting the cast shadows in really add to the depth of the image. Okay, now we can start doing this area of the hair. Background is just going to be in shadow, not the background, but the... yeah, you know what I mean. Go in and start filling in these large shadow areas where we know that light is not going to hit, such as this section here. The way I like to color, and mainly with shadows, is you block out the large shapes first, and then you go in and refine them. Then after you've done all your refining, you come in a final time and drop in your cast shadows. Just filling in the large shadows at this point. Pulling out our base color, where we know that shadows are not going to be. Clean this up a little. Coming in here and doing a little bit of the same. This is a little tricky. Do that and then pull out a highlight here. Okay. Now that that's taken care of, we can go in and start refining these shadows, throwing in a little bit more detail. strand that way. Could even pull a strand up here. Toss another one this way. Maybe fill that in. Toss another strand over here. And just really, we're just trying to create detail at this point. In my opinion, I would say try and get into the habit of using a brush that's larger than you need. You do this a lot when painting traditionally, and it just opens you up to a lot of techniques that can save quite a bit of time. Maybe adding in a little bit of detailing here, as well as on this section. Add some edge lighting, throw in some extra strands, as well as on this one. Maybe pull one down this way. And now with that taken care of, we can go in and start throwing in our cast shadows on this section of the hair. So we see our lights coming from the top left. We have strands right here. So we're just trying to, you don't need to really be that correct with this point, but we're just trying to show that there is some level of depth to this. Could even throw in some for the arm. Then for the gun and the hand, we can just try and make it seem like there's going to be a shadow from the barrel of the gun. Maybe. At this point, you kind of need to be careful. You can't overdo it, but we're trying to, like with the cast shadows, you want the cast shadow to be in place, but you also need to be careful if it removes your edge lighting. So you kind of have to pick and choose which one you want. But it's really up to you. There's no wrong way to do it. We have the thumb going up that way. Multiply, and then we drop the opacity a little. Should be fine like that. Yeah. Turn the face back on. Now we're going to be coloring the clothing. Turn everything off, select the layer we want, grab the color, make it slightly blue. Now we're into coloring. Painting in the large areas of the shadows. After that's taken care of, we can come and pull up the highlights. And throw in cast shadows, such as where the ribbon would block light into the area below. Likewise here. Same with this section. then grabbing our cast shadows in from this side. Taking this out, that would be highlights. Throwing in those cast shadows here from all the shapes that would block light from above. And try not to hug the edge of like the areas. If you separate them, you can create a lot more depth that way. Might as well go in and throw some edge lighting around this side. And you can really do this in any order you want. I like to place all of my base tones in first, and then go in and shadow everything out. Then after the shadows are done, then I'll go back and highlight everything. But you can really do it in any order you want. You can start with your highlights and then work towards your shadows. You can start with all of your completely dark areas and work your way lighter. Or you can focus on single materials at once. Pick one section, shadow, and highlight it. There's no wrong way to do this. It's all up to you and doing whatever you're comfortable with to get the final product you want. Okay, now the browns are done, so we can jump into the yellows. With yellows, I like using really high not opacity, but the high values. And more opacity than you would use for other ones. The yellow's a very strange color. It took me quite a while to get the hang of coloring with it. I'll probably need to come in and adjust the color afterwards for the yellows. We're just following the shadows from the browns that we used already. trying to follow that same shape. Again, coloring everything in, then pulling out our highlights afterwards. Yeah. See, the orange is a little bit too saturated for me. But we're doing what we can, adding in a little bit of cast shadows from the edge of the ribbon here. Because of the lights coming down from the top left, we're only going to do it to this one side, and not the right, because light would hit that. Easier way to work is do what you know first. So like for this part of the ribbon, I know that there would be shadows in these two areas, and so I draw them in first. Then I come back and add what I'm not too sure about afterwards. This one. Dropping in some edge lights here. You don't really need to, they probably wouldn't on materials or on a clothing material. I like to throw them in anyway. And here we're just throwing in shadows that we're going to be pulling the highlights out of. Like this, it would be following the shape of the shadow we already drew. You keep that cohesion between surfaces. A little bit of edge lighting. And same bit down here. Following the area we already drew. And then like the other surfaces, we're going to be shadowing out the large areas first. After that's done, we can come in and start doing the detailing. Right here, we're just throwing in some cast shadows from this band, the belt, a little bit from the hair. Going to make that a little wavy so it matches the shape above. Do the same over here. This part's a little confusing for where we should put the shadows on the clothing. I think we should pull this side down a little, like that. And then like before, we're going to pick up the color we used again, toss another layer down, and go in with the gradient tool. Then after that's taken care of, oops, drop it down to 50%. We have the yellows done. Now with the skirts. Again, we're going to be tossing on a multiply layer since there's multiple colors in there. And grab our red gray color. And start going in with the shadows. Okay, there's the main shadows done. So we'll be applying them to the guns now. Okay, and with that done, we can start... I think at this point I'm going to start post-processing. I've recently been saving a lot of my techniques for coloring and just tossing it all into post. So to start with that, we take everything, toss it into one folder. What is this? Oh, that's the base sketch. I don't need those, so delete them for now. Now that we have one folder set up, we can start clipping to it. We're going to start with multiply. Again, jumping into our red. And now, I'm going to start grabbing the colors that are more in the background. Mainly for the hair. Once we have the hair selected, we can start tossing everything into the back. I think I'm going to use a more blue. Yeah. think I'll have to do all these separate. Be easier that way. Whoops. Ooh, that doesn't sound good. I'll add a quick highlight to the hair over here. I'll go back in with another multiply layer to add a little more detail to the hair at the back. Okay, and then after that's done, we'll add another layer. And start applying this to the hair at the back. Try and push it further into the background. So I'm going to open up the color layer, right click on hair, selection from layer, create selection. Then what I'm going to do is turn off the face once more, and deselect, whoops, any of the hair up here. go in with the lasso and select any of these large areas of highlight or of line art. Because if we don't, then the line art will not be affected by what we're about to do. Okay, now with that selected, we can jump onto this layer, grab white. We're just going to be airbrushing all of the hair at once. If your background were like a blue, you would grab blue. You're grabbing your background color and you're applying it to the areas of your picture that are furthest away. Going to need this part of the outline as well. This basically pushes your drawing into the background, which we want for this section of the drawing. Okay, and that should be good for that. Now we're going to go in and color our line art. This can be done in several ways. The way I like to do it is to just lock the transparency and just go and color the line art. Another way you can do it is keep your outline in one layer and toss a layer on top and clip it to the folder. Then wherever you color will only affect the line art. One thing that could happen is as you're coloring your line art, you'll notice a bunch of holes start to open up, like in the section of the hair. We don't want that. So what we'll end up doing is grabbing our magic wand, selecting basically all of the areas that are in the background. So all of the areas that aren't part of our drawing. We're going to select those. Once we have everything selected, we're going to push Ctrl-Shift-I. That's going to select all of the area that is inside the bounds of our drawing. So then we're going to add a layer below. We're going to choose a color that isn't quite black because we're trying to get away from that. It's probably like a really dark brown would work. And grabbing a very large brush and filling all of that in. It creates a mask behind our image that's just of this one color. That way any holes that open up in our line art would show this layer through. You can see, as we turn it off, turn it on. Actually, we missed a section down here. There. Now as we turn it off and turn it on, we can see all the holes are getting filled. The last layer to do is the face, I think. Yep. This is one of the more important ones. Just gonna grab the eyes, the eyebrows. going to touch up the bow over here. A little bit of the gun. I see part of the hair that I missed. And that's that. Hope you enjoyed this, learned something from it. Total time would have been around, I think, 3 hours. Hour and a half for outlining, hour and a half for coloring, and maybe 40 minutes for the initial sketch. But I did a lot of commentary on top of the first section, so maybe about 3 hours to do a full picture. Hope you liked this, hope you learned something. If you have any more suggestions for video ideas, just let me know. I'll be happy to make them.